Good morning, Kutztown University. This is Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, and you are currently listening to Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR. This is the show about movies, specifically movies on the Criterion Collection, and for those of you who do not know, the Criterion Collection is a film distribution company that is dedicated to gathering the greatest films from around the world and publishing them in editions of the highest technical quality, with supplemental features that enhance the appreciation of the art of film. We are returning from a very long hiatus. I am returning from a very long hiatus. It's just me up in my head again. I have warded off my inner demon, and he is gone. No longer will this show be about non-sequitur topics like video games. We are now focused solely on the movies and the appreciation of the art of movies. I've been gone for maybe about a month now, so I guess to catch up, I have been watching movies and logging them on Letterboxd. That's about it. For those keeping up with the 2022 Criterion Challenge, do not fret. I made sure to keep up with it, so I watched all of the movies that I put in place for myself, which I have posted on Instagram about. So hopefully these 5 movies that I'm going to talk about on today's episode, if I can fit 5 reviews in one episode, hopefully you've seen them, because I did make an announcement prior, and if you yell at me about spoilers, that is your own fault. Before I hop into the reviews, though, I would like to make a big announcement that those of you who have looked closely and kept up with the film distribution world already know, because this is, in fact, old news. I would have addressed it had I been on whenever it was first announced, but I was not. So alas, the news now is that while Arrow Video is an inferior film distribution company to the Criterion Collection, it is still a very, very good and it's a very good film distribution company. And it has been brought to my attention that True Romance, initially locked as an Arrow Video release to an out-of-print UK edition, is now available for pre-order, and it is set to release in July, and it comes with a Blu-ray, and there's also a 4K UHD edition, and there is also a Steelbook edition for both the Blu-ray and the 4K UHD edition. So that's very cool. I pre-ordered it because True Romance is one of the movies that I wish was on the Criterion Collection, but now I do not care about that because it is on an inferior but still reliable film distribution company, and then I can get rid of my DVD copy. Because as I have stated before, DVDs are obsolete, they look like garbage, and they are useless, and the only reason that people still buy DVDs is that they are cheap. And while Criterion, I believe, is the superior of the 2 film distribution companies, I think they should take notes, because you don't see Arrow putting out that DVD okay? I'm just saying. I also just wanted to say in other Arrow Video related news that today I treated myself, as Arrow Video is currently having an Easter sale, even though it is no longer Easter, but this sale is going on until April 30th. So everything is up to 65% off. I don't know if it applies to everything, or if it's just like a few select items that are up to 65% off. But I want to say that the thing that I splurged on today was a steal. And I feel like whenever Arrow Video mentions the 65% off, or the up to 65% off, it was referring to the 5 movies, yes, 5 movies, ladies and gentlemen, that I have purchased. These 5 movies are the 5 Battles Without Honor and Humanity, which I hear are some pretty sick Yakuza flicks, even though I have not yet seen them. I tend to not like blind buying, but $25 is $25. There are 5 of them, and I got all 5 of them for $25 because each one of them was $5, which I don't think I should have been allowed to pay that little for 5 movies on Blu-ray, no less. But I just wanted to inform you, as you still have 11 days left to partake in the Arrow Video sale, so if you wish to spend a lot of money, then I encourage it. So yeah, I think it's time to get to the movies, and I don't know if I can talk about the first one in the amount of time it'll take to get to the first break of the show, but we're going to try it. Alright, so the first movie that we have is Bamboozled by Spike Lee. Let me go on a little tangent. I will do my review after the break because I feel like this is going to shatter the world with this news. Speaking of Spike Lee, before I actually talk about Spike Lee, it was announced today, as of the day of recording this, that Spike Lee will be launching NFTs of his movie She's Gotta Have It. It's a collection of 3,945 NFTs that feature original frames from the film. This article says, "It's gotta be the NFTs. Spike Lee is joining the non-fungible tokens craze with a collection of crypto art linked to his seminal 1986 debut film She's Gotta Have It. In a partnership with content incubator The Visible Project, the filmmaker is launching a collection of 3,945 NFTs that will feature original frames from She's Gotta Have It with additional art designed by Trey Seals and Adrian Franks. The original frames contain, among others, Lee's iconic character Mars Blackmon. Lee owns and controls the rights to She's Gotta Have It, meaning the director will avoid the legal difficulties that filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino have faced in launching NFTs linked to their best work. And this is the first of me finding out that Tarantino is also launching NFTs. So let me click this real quick. Tarantino, in November of 2021, was apparently sued over Pulp Fiction NFTs by his film studio Miramax. I think it's time to go to break. Oh my god. I'll be right back. Stay tuned after these messages. Welcome back to Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR, the show where I talk about movies on the Criterion Collection. If you don't know what the Criterion Collection is, I have already introduced what the Criterion Collection is in the beginning of the show, and if you were not here, I would advise just to look it up because we do not have time to dilly-dally. The first film I'm going to talk about for the Criterion 2022 Challenge is a film from the 1990s, week 9. Actually, no, that was well, I can't say last week because that was like over a month ago. This is week 10. Well, it's not week 10 of 2022, but it is week 10's film because I was not here for week 10 or week 11 or week 12 or week 13 or week 14. And because I've been gone for so long, and because I have been watching these films as the weeks go by, not in bulk, a lot of these reviews today are going to be from memory and from the scarce notes that I took on them. So, wish me luck. But week 10's film was Bamboozled, directed by Spike Lee, which came out in, I think, just straight up 2000. Yeah, I was correct. September 18th, 2000, Spike Lee released Bamboozled, starring Damon Wayans, I believe, and one of my favorite actors who happens to be in True Romance, which is the movie that I bought or pre-ordered from Arrow Video for its upcoming June release. Where was I going? Michael Rappaport. And also, Jada Pinkett Smith is in this film too, and that's fairly topical, but I won't talk about that. However, if I was on the air whenever the Oscars happened, I might have talked about that. But that is old news. And I'm here to talk about Spike Lee's Bamboozled. Like most of Spike Lee's films, I can't say all of Spike Lee's films because of his Old Boy remake, but like most of Spike Lee's films, Bamboozled is a biting commentary and a political satire of racism in America. And with Bamboozled in particular, Spike Lee sheds light on the racism that is present in broadcast television. It is about a TV producer who needs to come up with the next big idea so he can make a lot of moolah. And upon pondering this idea and seeing old representations of blackface in television from mid-century America, the TV producer named Pierre Delacroix decides to bring blackface back into the forefront of modern broadcast television. He sets out to make the show so offensive that he gets fired from this broadcast network because he doesn't want to be part of it anymore, because he is the only black person there. And there is a lot of fake support from his white co-workers, but it's clear that he's ostracized there at the company. In his attempt to make this TV show about blackface, it becomes a massive success around the nation, and then he becomes corrupted by his greed and all of the moolah that he initially set out to make. The episodes of this show are littered with racial stereotypes of not just the visual appearance of black people, but the actions and temperaments of black people. Any basic racial stereotype that you can think of, Pierre Delacroix puts in his television show. And the audience of said show, i.e. white people, eat it up. As Delacroix's greed and corruption grows, he is haunted by the racist relics of mid-century American gadgets and gizmos, like dumbwaiters and clocks and paperweights and anything else that white people could have thought to put blackface on. The two men casted by Delacroix, Womack and Man Ray, also face the consequences of being in the show. It should be noted that these two characters' stage names were Sleep and Eat and Mantan, respectively. I don't have to delve into the reason why the name Sleep and Eat is disgusting and offensive, but for the less educated audience, I myself included, before having researched this, may not be aware of Mantan Moreland, who was a black American actor in the 1930s and 40s typecast as the bubbling idiot black man, drawing from the racist depictions of black people from American cinema from the 1930s and 40s, as well as the racist depictions of black people in 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s American television. It's clear to see why Spike Lee is now attacking Hollywood, and deservingly so. Content and themes-wise, Bamboozled is very consistent with Spike Lee's repertoire, but coming from an aesthetic standpoint, this film is incredibly strange. It still has the snappy editing and clever and playful writing that Spike Lee films tend to have, but on a visual standpoint, it's really weird and dated. Bamboozled is shot on a Sony VX1000 camera, which gives it a very dated look, like an early YouTube video in 480p. It's a very early digital camera, which is why it looks consistent with this classic YouTube style. 28 Days Later is another film that's shot on a Sony VX1000 camera, but that film looks even uglier than this one, and it's a more egregious example of this, which I think is the reason why it's not on the Criterion Collection and probably never will be. But we're not talking about 28 Days Later. Another thing about Bamboozled is that it's way more hyper-stylized than something like Do the Right Thing. It feels very dreamlike and less grounded in reality, but not like in a Lynchian way with surrealism, but more with a sense of uncanniness. When I mentioned that Delacroix is haunted by relics of old-time America, with blackface stamped all over everything, these segments of the film are very horrific, just because the video quality makes it look not like a special effect, but like these inanimate objects are like actually moving and taunting him. It's very scary. Bamboozled overall is like a fever dream. The editing is very trippy, the narrative is unsettling and unhopeful, and while it has that classic Spike Lee anger, it's also just very creepy. There's also dated CGI sprinkled throughout this film, which adds another level of just uneasiness. It's true that Bamboozled is a political satire, but it teeters on horror occasionally, I would say. It's very unnerving, but I do recommend it. Bamboozled, directed by Spike Lee, is pretty good. Watch Bamboozled. We are approaching a break right now, so I cannot start talking about the second film. I'm going to try to speed through these. Hopefully I can talk about 5 movies by the end of this show today. But stay tuned after this break for whenever I start talking about Week 10's film. I think Week 11's film? I don't remember. I'll get that situated after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR. I am doing Week 11 of the Kriterion 2022 Challenge, even though it is currently Week 15? 16? I think it's 15. This was a few weeks ago. The film I am discussing is Céline Sciamma's... Wait. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. Céline Sciamma. Her name is Céline Sciamma, and her film is Portrait de la jeune fille info.
La jeune fille.
If you have to do this
is an ad on YouTube. Portrait. How do I pronounce this film? Les jeunes filles. I'm talking about Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Let me practice this pronunciation real quick. Portrait de la jeune fille en feu. Alright, so the film that I am talking about now is Portrait de la jeune fille en feu. Portrait de la jeune fille en feu, directed by Céline Sciamma. A French film, of course. It is a 2019 historical romantic drama featuring a woman who is hired to paint a painting of another woman. This painting is made for the intent of it being a wedding gift for the titular lady's newlywed, and the person hired to paint the painting is instructed to make sure that the titular lady does not know that she is having a titular portrait made of her. Throughout the film, the two women begin to fall in love with each other, and then clear complications happen whenever the titular lady finds out that the painter is in fact making a titular portrait of her, even though she really is against the idea of having one done. To conclude talking about the general plot of the film, I also want to say that I enjoy the stance that this film takes on the longevity of art. Because after all is said and done and we get to the end of the film, and the titular lady has another portrait of her painted years down the line, a token the painter gives to the lady to remember her by appears now in a painting, as the lady had it in her pose. While the two women can never be together again, their love lives on through art and perseveres through the rest of time. Unlike another French film that appears on the Criterion Collection entitled... Alright, well, I'm not talking about that movie, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it right now because it's too much. We're on a tight schedule. Blue is the Warmest Color, which is a very explicit film, and that's pretty much all I can really say about it on the radio because it is explicit in its adult nature. Portrait de la jeune fille en feu is much more patient. It's a lot more thought-provoking. It's more humanistic, and it's not about the eater relationship as it is really about the romantic relationship between these two women. Whereas you have the gimmick of the very explicit scenes in Blue is the Warmest Color, the draw towards Portrait de la jeune fille en feu is the incredibly slow and passionate narrative and characterization of these people, and the very beautiful and historic setting topped with the stunningly composed cinematography and naturalistic lighting. It has more of the draw of Kubrick's Barry Lyndon rather than an adult film. Portrait de la jeune fille en feu is incredibly successful in capturing the viewer, mesmerizing them with a beautiful and clever love story. I wish I could talk more about the filmmaking aspects of it, but because of the small amount of time I have, as well as the lack of me actually owning this film as of right now, I'm just generally unaware of the technical qualities of it. And it's also been weeks since I have seen it. But I do recommend Portrait de la jeune fille en feu, directed by Céline Sciamma. So watch Portrait de la jeune fille en feu, or Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Now we are on to the next film, and the next film for week 12 is another French film directed by Jean-Pierre Melville, entitled Les Silences de la Mer, or The Silence of the Sea. I also forgot to mention, the last film, week 11's film, was a film from the 2010s. But now, since we are out of the decades part of the list curated by Ben, well, actually curated by me, the challenge was created by Ben, Letterboxd user Ben, but it was curated by me. The next week is a genre film under the war genre. So for week 12, like I said, I will be discussing Les Silences de la Mer, directed by Jean-Pierre Melville. And despite the fact that the topic of this week, in which I have selected this film, is that it is a war movie, this movie is merely a movie set during wartime. It is not a war movie. The film I am talking about for week 12, I want to say, is Les Silences de la Mer, directed by Jean-Pierre Melville from the year 1949. Les Silences de la Mer is adapted from the novel of a same name by Arthur Vercou, which is a pen name of Jean Brulaire. The premise of the film is that a man and his niece run an inn in a small French village, and a Nazi soldier happens upon this inn in seeking refuge in Germany-occupied France in early 1941. It's very bold of the author of the novel, as well as Jean-Pierre Melville, to humanize this Nazi soldier, because in this film the Nazi soldier is very friendly, he's very knowledgeable in the arts, and he's very reserved, and he's very patient. When the man and his niece find out that this man is a Nazi soldier, rather than kicking him out, they still offer him shelter, but refuse to say a word to the man. The Nazi soldier is met every day with burning silence, and he is essentially isolated from these people, and therefore just isolated from people in general, because these people are the only people that he sees on a regular basis. Throughout the film, the Nazi soldier expresses his feelings towards unity between the French people and the German people, and that art transcends nationality. The man and the niece do not buy the words of the Nazi soldier because, he's a Nazi. This man is brainwashed by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi invasion, and he is of the belief that the invasion will forever bring a marriage between France and Germany. Eventually, the Nazi gets a leave, and he spends a vacation in Paris to enrich himself with the art. However, upon his trip to Paris, he soon discovers that the Holocaust is happening. He was unaware this whole time, and not to begin talking about current events, but it kind of mirrors the Russia-Ukraine conflict, wherein a lot of people on the Russian end are unaware of the atrocities that are occurring because of the incessant propaganda laid upon them by their government. But I'm not going to talk about that. I just felt that that was an interesting parallel to this film that came out like 7 decades ago. I unfortunately do not remember how this film ends, but that is the general premise of it, and I think it was a very thought-provoking film. Les Silences de la Mer came out at around a time whenever World War II was still fresh on the minds of the human race, and that there was still a bad energy between France and Germany. The film opens up with a disclaimer saying, or I guess mostly saying, because the version of this film on the Criterion channel only gives most of the translation, and I do not have the time to accurately pronounce it in French at the moment. But it reads, Insert French blurb here. Of solving the problem of French and German relations, for they cannot be resolved while barbarous Nazi crimes, committed with the complicity of German people, remain fresh in men's minds. A large controversy of Les Salons de la Mer is that it was sympathetic towards this Nazi character, but the intent of this disclaimer was to point the audience in a direction implying that it is not pro-Nazi, but pro-unity. And the depiction of Nazis in this film, besides this main character anyway, are evil and unforgiving, deservingly so. To tell the story, the film heavily relies on an external narration of the man who runs the inn. Thus, Les Salons de la Mer is described as anti-cinematographic, because it heavily relies on telling rather than showing. However, I think this is definitely made up for by the heavy use of the noir aesthetics that Melville employs in this film. It's very dark and very moody, and while the film takes place in mostly one area, like a stage play almost, it doesn't make you feel trapped in it because the camera angles are incredibly creative and very expressive, and the lighting in the film is also very expressive. Just picture your general noir flick from the 1940s and 50s, and, you're also picturing Les Salons de la Mer. Jean-Pierre Melville continues to not disappoint me. This is maybe his 4th or 5th movie that I've seen now. I love it again. I love Jean-Pierre Melville. Les Salons de la Mer, directed by Jean-Pierre Melville. It's pretty good. Watch Les Salons de la Mer, directed by Jean-Pierre Melville from the year 1949. Looks good on time? Sweet. Okay, we have another film coming up for week 13 now. It is week 13's film, despite the fact that it is not week 13 of week 13 of 2022, but in fact week 15 of 2022. And don't worry, I will talk about it's week 14. It's week 14 of 2022, and don't worry, I am going to talk about the week 14 film of 2022, but right now is the week 13 film of 2022 because I did not talk about it last week, which was week 13 of 2022. The next film is a science fiction film, and the science fiction film in question, which is on the Criterion Collection, is, what's the man's name? Hold on. The man's name is, what is his name? Takashi Murakami. He directed the film Jellyfish Eyes. For those of you who don't know, Takashi Murakami is a Japanese artist, which I will talk about in depth later. But right now, I'm going to talk about his one and only film, Jellyfish Eyes, which is basically like, it's like Pokemon. It's like if Pokemon was directed by Takeshi Miike, I think his name is. I'm not gonna look it up. That's I am not talking about whatever his last name is Miike. It's like Takeshi Mike, but with two. I'm not talking about that. All right, so Jellyfish Eyes. It is about a kid who finds a Pokemon, and the Pokemon turns into his best friend, but this Pokemon is like a bioweapon made by these evil scientist bros. And apparently this isn't the only Pokemon. The titular jellyfish with the eyes is not the only Pokemon that these evil scientists have created. There is an ocean of Pokemon that all of the kids in this neighborhood have. And I guess all of the negative energy, something about negative energy makes a big monster at the end of the movie, and the kids, all of the kids in the movie with their Pokemon have to fight this big Pokemon, and then they win, but then all of the Pokemon die, and then they're like, oh my god, we're so sad, we lost all of our Pokemon, and then something happens, I don't remember, and all the Pokemon come back to life. And then everybody lives happily ever after, and that is Jellyfish Eyes, directed by Takashi Murakami. My notes says that Jellyfish Eyes is reminiscent of the filmic forays of Salvador Dali with his collaboration with Louis Buñuel, Un Chien Andalou, and Andy Warhol. And I don't know any Andy Warhol films, but I guess Andy Warhol is a filmmaker. I don't know what I meant by this, so I'm not even going to expand upon that. Jellyfish Eyes is a film in the Criterion Collection that is unanimously agreed upon that it does not belong in the Criterion Collection, and I mean, I don't know, I kind of enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for what it was, which was a cheesy film for kids, and I think there is a reason as to why it is on the Criterion Collection that I think people are really overlooking whenever they think of the quality of this film, because the Criterion Collection really is about certain feats that are met in the world of cinema that directors can achieve. And the fact that this film is not made by a filmmaker, but a visual artist, is kind of impressive. Filmmaking was a very novel concept for Murakami, and the fact that he was able to tackle it coherently and competently is something that really should be considered whenever thinking about this film. One of my favorite parts about this film, like Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog 2, but I won't talk about that in depth for spoiler reasons, is the post-credit scene where it teases a sequel. So there was going to be, I guess there is going to be a Jellyfish Eye sequel. Production took a very, 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 very long time, or is taking a very, 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 very long time, because the first Jellyfish Eyes, I believe, came out in 2013, and production was canceled whenever COVID happened. It basically bankrupted Murakami's production company, but he seems to be back on his feet now, and as of a couple weeks/months ago, I don't remember how long ago it was, but I know it was fairly recent, that it has been announced that production on the sequel of Jellyfish Eyes has resumed, miraculously. So keep an eye out for Jellyfish Eyes 2 and all of the new Pokemon that Murakami will conceptualize and bring to life. Jellyfish Eyes from 2013, directed by Takashi Murakami, is pretty good despite what the other pretentious Criterion film collectors that are not myself and YouTube user Daisuke Beppu, who is the Bob Ross of the Criterion Collection, I might add. So watch Jellyfish Eyes, directed by Takashi Murakami from the year 2013, unless you hate fun. I do not seem to have enough time for the next review before this break, so I'm just going to take a break. So stay tuned for this week's Criterion film, Week 14, which I will not disclose until after the break, but for those of you who keep up with the Instagram page, i.e. at CinemaSid the Criterion Kid on Instagram, spelled with a K. Criterion is spelled with a K, for alliteration's sake, because K is the first letter in the word kid as well. Where was I going with that? You know what movie I'm about to talk about, but yeah, follow my Instagram page if you don't, and keep on top of it. So stay tuned.
The radio voice of Kutztown University.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to Cinema Sid, the Criterion Kid, on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR. Before I begin talking about the last film of this episode, potentially, because I might have a decent amount of time to maybe talk about something else, I want to say that in that previous sweeper, that stock footage truck horn stock sound effect is my least favorite stock sound effect of all time. It fills me with immense anger, and nothing can relinquish the hate that I am currently feeling. I just wanted to get that off my chest because I feel like if I internalize that, somebody may have fallen victim to my hands. So this week's Criterion film, week 14, I believe, is a Criterion film under the genre of a musical or a music-related film. The film I chose for this week is Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, starring Rob Schneider, who you may know from Jaws, because you do not watch as many movies as I do. All That Jazz is filled with very hypnotic choreography that really displays the human body in very interesting ways as they contort and seemingly combine with each other during these elongated dance segments. However, these dance segments and the music, while in the forefront, are not the focus of the film. Well, like, they're the main focus of the film, but it's not what the film is really about. The film is a meditation on death. A very bleak meditation on death. Theater director Joe Gideon lives a very self-destructive life with constant smoking, constant drinking, and constant eating. This severely unhealthy lifestyle eventually leads to a severe case of angina, which hospitalizes him. After told to calm down, Gideon refuses and continues to lead his unhealthy lifestyle, knowing that it'll eventually kill him, and he just doesn't seem to care. And, it ends up killing him at the end of the film. It is incredibly sad in the way that it's presented, but it's not like it's a big surprise, because Joe Gideon lives this incredibly monotonous life, which is presented to the audience through this repetitious montage that happens a few times over the course of the film, depicting the same thing over and over again. And structurally, this film seems to parallel Jean Dielman 23 Quai du Commerce, Mi-4 von Bruxelles, where this monotony is slowly changed throughout the film. A different aspect of the daily routine is disrupted, but whereas the disruption of the routines in Jean Dielman are a little bit more subtle, the ones in All That Jazz stylistically call attention to itself. Maybe like a different camera angle, or a different camera speed, or a different type of sound design, or just the way that Joe Gideon progressively sluggishly moves. The discussion of this montage now brings me to the filmmaking aspects of this film. All That Jazz has the quick, snappy editing of a Spike Lee movie and the threatening compositional aura of a Terry Gilliam movie. And what I mean by that is that, the editing is very, very fast-paced and constantly shifts focus between subjects, and the threatening composition refers to the very unconventional camera angles that warp the spaces and view people in very threatening ways. All That Jazz is deliberately disorienting, using tons of mirror reflections and breaking the 180-degree rule, constantly jumping between points and times in montages of the same monotonous thing, like the showering that Joe Gideon does, or the medication that he takes, or the proclamation of "It's showtime, folks," in front of the mirror, or the Vivaldi tape that he plays. All of this repetition and all of this monotony, I think, reflects Joe's debilitating condition. It's like a literal life flashing before one's eyes. The composition of these shots are even more insane than The Shining, and drive the audience even more insane than when watching The Shining. If you watch this movie and you were a fan of the very distracting nature of it, one recommendation that I can give, which I have definitely talked about on this show before, is Rainer Werner Fassbinder's World on a Wire. Actually, yeah, I mentioned that when I was talking about how it also shares similarities to Hiroshi Teshigahara's Tanin no Kao, or, The Face of Another for my English-speaking audience. So All That Jazz is another film that is very distracting in its style, while deliberately serving the purpose of the narrative. With all of these qualities on top of the very ethereal and surreal qualities of this film, it's also very Lynchian now that I'm thinking about it. All That Jazz is really an amalgam of a bunch of things, which doesn't detract from the quality of itself, because it grabs all of the best qualities from those other things that are comparable to it and kind of combines them all into one movie about death and the absurdity of it. It's like if Synecdoche, New York were a musical. And if ever there were an anniversary edition of this film, I would hope that that quote ends up on the front of it with the 5 stars that I gave it on Letterboxd. However, that is an edition I will not be buying, because by the time that edition comes out, I will already own the Criterion Collection edition of it. All That Jazz, directed by Bob Fosse. I mean, I'm just going to assume that's how you pronounce his last name. Is pretty good. Watch All That Jazz and then cry. I have a message now from the KU Notebook, and it seems that we have successfully gotten to the end of the show. So stay tuned for the outroduction. Thank you for listening to Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR. Join me next week, hopefully, as I talk about more movies and more Criterion announcements and news, and hopefully there's a lot of stuff to talk about. But I guess time will tell. Thank you for your patience in waiting for me, and thank you for watching all of these movies along with me. I never felt like I was alone for a second, and if you didn't watch these films with me, or if you didn't know... Well, no. These are two different things. If you didn't know that I was going to talk about these movies today and you wish to join the discussion for future episodes of Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid, you can follow Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on Instagram, or email cinemacidthecriterionkid@gmail.com. And keep in mind that Criterion is spelled with a K in both of those instances, because K is also the first letter in the word kid, so therefore I made Criterion also start with a K for alliteration's sake. And if you were aware of the discussion of these movies today, and you didn't decide to give me any of your feedback, then shame on you. Go watch TV, because it seems that film is outside your realm of deserving. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. Watch movies.